Imagine discovering that the person you trusted most, the person you dedicated your life to, betrayed you in a way that could destroy everything you've built. Now, imagine having the chance to forgive them. What would you do? This is the story of Megan, who faced a devastating betrayal and had to make the most difficult decision of her life: pursue revenge or find true strength in the power of forgiveness. What happens next will surprise and deeply move you. Stay with me and discover how. Forgiveness can transform everything. The pain of betrayal is difficult to describe, but easy to recognize. For those who have experienced it, the memories of a broken heart, of a moment of broken trust, are unforgettable. The idea that someone you loved deeply, someone you considered a part of your very soul, could turn their back on you so cruelly leaves deep scars. For the protagonist of our story, Megan, this pain arrived in a devastating and transformative way. Something she never imagined would happen to her. It all began as a tale of friendship. Megan and Sarah had met in college and had been inseparable since their first semester. They'd been through everything together: study nights, celebrations, venting, dreams, and even the insecurities we all experience at some point. Sarah wasn't just a friend. She was like a sister. Together, the two formed a bond that seemed unbreakable. And Megan believed that nothing, not time, not life's hardships, would be able to destroy what they had built. As Megan began to excel in her professional career, doors began to open. She landed a dream job, began to gain recognition in her field, and everything seemed to be going well. But as her life took a successful turn, something began to change, subtly but unsettlingly. Conversations with Sarah became colder, their outings less frequent, and although Megan tried to justify it to herself, something wasn't right. The realization came suddenly, but Megan could never have imagined the magnitude of what she was about to discover. On a seemingly ordinary day, while Megan was at work, a notification appeared on her phone, an anonymous message. Unsure of what to expect, she opened it, and the words that appeared before her eyes were like a blow. The betrayal was there, clear and devastating. Sarah, her best friend, had gone behind Megan's back, damaging her career, spreading lies, and manipulating situations to take credit for achievements that weren't hers. Anger and disbelief washed over Megan. It was hard to believe that someone so close to her could be capable of such evil. How could Sarah do this? How could she destroy something that had been built with such care and dedication? The feeling of emptiness and disillusionment consumed her completely. It wasn't just the betrayal of a friend, but the feeling of being discarded, of being used as a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Friendship, love, trust, everything had been thrown away, without any consideration. For Megan, this discovery was a painful milestone that changed her life forever. She found herself lost in a whirlwind of emotions. She could no longer trust anyone. She didn't know if she could continue her career, and the emotional scars seemed endless. Her mind was overwhelmed with questions. How to cope? How to move forward knowing that someone you loved had betrayed your trust in the cruelest way? But what Megan didn't know at the time was that the worst was yet to come, and that sometimes the most intense pain leads to the greatest transformation. This feeling of betrayal took a physical, mental, and emotional toll. Megan, in a state of despair, began to withdraw from the people around her. She couldn't trust anyone, had trouble sleeping, and every time she looked in the mirror, the only thing she saw was a broken woman, a reflection of someone who had lost strength and hope. Anger took over, and no matter how hard she tried to escape, the shadow of betrayal was always there, following her. But something inside her was beginning to shift. Megan didn't know exactly when or how, but she felt she couldn't continue drowning in the sea of resentment. Each tear that fell seemed to carry with it a bit of the anger and hatred she harbored for Sarah. But at the same time, she felt consumed by a sense of powerlessness. She knew she couldn't let this pain dominate her life forever. Something had to change, and that something began with the decision to face her feelings, no matter how difficult they were. And that's where Megan's journey begins. The pain of betrayal was a turning point in her life, but paradoxically, it was also the beginning of a profound transformation. Megan didn't know it at the time, but her pain would lead her on an unexpected path of forgiveness, healing, and overcoming. And that's what we'll talk about from now on. How pain, no matter how unbearable, can be the first step toward true liberation. What follows in Megan's story will surprise you, because, as you'll see, forgiveness can be the key to opening the doors to true peace and inner power. If you've ever identified with this pain or experienced betrayal, I want you to know that there's always a way out. And if you want to see how Megan found hers, keep watching and prepare yourself for a story of overcoming that can transform your life too. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any of the next chapters of this journey of redemption. Share it with friends who also need to hear this story. And let's spread the message together that, despite the pain, there is always a path to healing and freedom. After the crushing pain of betrayal, Megan found herself faced with a difficult, silent choice, a constant internal struggle, how to deal with what she felt. Anger, frustration, heartbreak. All these feelings were intertwined so deeply that it seemed impossible to separate them. Every new thought about Sarah, every memory of the moments they had shared, weighed heavily on Megan's soul. She had been betrayed in a way she could not ignore, and the resentment she now carried seemed to grow with each passing day. But what Megan didn't know was that this resentment, fueled day after day, was beginning to erode much more than just her peace of mind. It affected every aspect of her life. Grief, at first, may seem like a natural reaction to pain. When we're hurt, we want to somehow bottle up that feeling as a way of protecting ourselves. The idea is that if we don't remember how much we were hurt, we might forget the person who caused the pain, or worse, the pain itself. But grief, when unaddressed, when kept hidden and repressed, has devastating power. It grows silently, affecting our emotional, psychological, and even physical health. Megan felt it every morning. The anger that had built up inside her felt like a snowball that, as it fed, only grew larger and heavier. She realized the hurt wouldn't let her sleep. The nights became endless, her thoughts racing, reliving the words Sarah had said to her, the actions she had taken, and the broken promises. Megan would wake in the middle of the night feeling a crushing anxiety, as if she had lost control of something that should never have been given to anyone in the first place. Her trust. This psychological impact wasn't limited to her sleepless nights. Megan began to withdraw from everyone around her. Friends who had previously been close began to sense the shift in her energy. She became increasingly withdrawn, distancing herself from the people she loved. What began as a way of protecting herself quickly turned into an emotional blockage. Megan locked herself in her own pain, unable to cope with the feelings building up inside her. When she tried to talk about her feelings, the weight of her hurt was so great that her words were lost, making communication nearly impossible. She felt like she couldn't connect with anyone, and this isolation only increased her frustration. Megan found herself constantly trapped in a cycle of repetitive thoughts. The resentment she harbored seemed to occupy her entire mind. In quiet moments, when she wasn't working or trying to distract herself, she felt a deep emptiness, as if her life were being consumed by something she couldn't control. Every little detail about Sarah, every person who mentioned her name, reignited the fire of hurt in her chest. And the more Megan tried to move on, the more she felt the constant presence of this pain, like a shadow that never left her alone. On a physical level, the hurt also began to affect Megan's health. She noticed she was constantly tired, even after a good night's sleep. Her body felt overwhelmed, as if carrying an invisible burden. Headaches became frequent, and her energy simply vanished. When she saw a doctor, the explanation was clear: stress, anxiety, and a strong emotional impact. although the cause was obvious to them. Everyone around her, Megan at the time, failed to realize that the resentment she was harboring was the true root of her exhaustion. Holding resentment, as legitimate a response to betrayal as it may seem, does nothing but trap the person in a state of continuous suffering. It becomes an emotional prison, where the victim ends up being hurt more than the person who caused the pain. For Megan, this manifested itself in reactive behavior, where her anger and frustration spilled over into every area of her life, affecting her decisions, her relationships, and her ability to see things clearly. Anger turned into distrust, distrust into fear, and fear into a constant feeling of helplessness. The impact of grief isn't limited to your emotions or physical health. It also directly affects your relationships. Megan's friends and family began to notice that she was different. Her closest friends tried, with good intentions, to support her and listen to her frustrations. However, the weight of her grief became an impossible barrier to overcome. Megan couldn't open her heart to anyone, and those who tried to help her were slowly pushed away. She no longer knew how to trust, and no matter how much others tried to reach out, the emotional distance between her and the rest of the world widened. It was at this point of utter darkness that Megan began to ask herself, what am I really losing with all this anger? Who is being hurt by this resentment? This reflection, though painful, became the first step toward change. Megan realized she wasn't just punishing Sarah, she was punishing herself too. By holding on to her hurt, she was allowing one person's pain to take over her entire life. By holding on to resentment, she was pushing herself away from everything and everyone who still loved and cared about her. It's important to understand that resentment isn't just a passing feeling. It's a daily choice. A choice not to forgive, not to let go of what hurts us. And by choosing to hold onto this resentment, we become prisoners of a pain that we no longer have control over. Megan was trapped in this emotional prison, and only when she began to reflect on the consequences of holding on to this hurt did she realize she was only fueling her suffering and loneliness. And this is where the power of forgiveness comes in. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened or justifying others' mistakes. Forgiveness isn't about the person who hurt you. It's about you. It's about choosing and peace, healing, and freedom. Megan, realizing how much hurt was affecting her health, her relationships, and her life, realized she could only move forward if she made the decision to release the resentment that held her captive. This was the decision that would take her to the next step in her journey, but for that to happen, she would have to confront the pain in a way that still seemed impossible. If you also recognize yourself in this pain, in this cycle of hurt that never seems to end, know that there is always a choice. Don't let the weight of resentment define your life. Forgiveness can be the key to freeing you from this emotional prison and allowing you to live a lighter, happier life, more connected to what truly matters. If you're ready to take this next step, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to continue following Megan's journey and learn how she took the first step toward transformation. If you know someone who needs this message, share this video, and let's spread the word that forgiveness is the key to true freedom. Megan was accustomed to living in a way dictated by the circumstances of pain and grief. Everyday life became a series of internal battles, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy while her soul was torn apart from within. Every step felt heavier, every smile forced. She didn't want to admit to anyone, not even herself, how much anger and bitterness were consuming her. But one ordinary morning, when she least expected, a turning point occurred. It all started when Megan went to clean out an old trunk that held some mementos from her childhood. The trunk sat in the corner of her room, covered in dust and forgotten things. Opening it, Megan found a stack of letters, old photos, and small objects that evoked memories of a time when life seemed simpler. But among those letters, one stood out. It was aged, in her mother's handwriting, a firm script, full of care and wisdom. Megan hesitated for a moment, but something made her feel the need to open that letter, as if she were about to discover something that could change her life. Opening the paper, Megan read the words her mother had written many years ago, words that, at first glance, seemed simple, but now, given everything she was going through, felt like a message directly addressed to her. The letter spoke of forgiveness, the importance of not holding grudges, and how the act of forgiving is often not something we do for others, but for ourselves. It reminded Megan of a lesson her mother always tried to teach her. Forgiveness is not forgetting, but a gift we give ourselves to heal the wounds of the past and move forward. Megan's mother's words echoed deeply in her mind and heart. It was as if a light had been turned on within her, illuminating a part of her soul that had long been shadowed. In that moment, Megan realized that, over the months, she had been spending all her energy trying to control something that, deep down, she could never control: the pain caused by betrayal. Anger didn't make her stronger. It didn't make her braver. It didn't help her move forward. Instead, it kept her captive in a cycle of suffering that knew no end. Encountering that letter was a turning point. Megan wasn't prepared for what it meant for her life, but she knew deep down that something inside her was about to change. That simple letter was a key that would unlock the door to healing and transformation. A door Megan never imagined she'd have the courage to open. But as she read those words, she realized that by forgiving Sarah, she would not only free the other person, but also free herself from a burden already too heavy to bear. At that moment, Megan found herself before an invisible mirror. The mirror reflected not her face, but her soul. She looked at herself and realized how much the resentment she carried was impacting her. Not only her health and relationships, but her very perception of who she was. She was losing the strong woman she once was, the woman capable of facing life's challenges with courage and faith. Anger and resentment had negatively shaped her identity, and she found herself once again trapped within her own emotional prison. It was then that Megan understood that forgiveness was more than just an act of generosity toward another person. Forgiveness was, first and foremost, an act of courage toward herself. It was the recognition that Sarah's pain no longer needed to define her life. The act of forgiving Sarah, of accepting that while the betrayal was something Megan could never forget, she could choose not to be consumed by it, was a gift she needed to give herself. Forgiveness now was no longer a distant idea or something impossible. It increasingly became a vital necessity, something Megan knew she had to do to free herself and start over. Reflecting on the letter, Megan realized that forgiveness didn't mean she was somehow validating Sarah's actions or justifying the betrayal. Forgiveness meant Megan was allowing herself to heal, giving herself the chance to rebuild her life, free from the weight of the hurt and resentment that had only held her back in the past. Forgiving Sarah, contrary to what Megan initially believed, wasn't a weakness. It was a sign of inner strength, of someone who knew that true freedom could only be found when we free ourselves from the emotional weight that keeps us trapped in painful moments. And it was at that moment that Megan realized the key to her freedom was already in her hands. Forgiveness was the only way to break the chains of her own emotional prison. It was the only way to stop torturing herself over something that had already happened and that she could not change. Megan's life lay before her, ready to be rewritten, and forgiveness would be the first word in this new story. Now, with a clarity she'd lacked before, Megan knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Forgiveness wasn't something that would happen overnight, but she also knew that, from that moment on, she had something she'd lacked before: the decision to no longer be held hostage by her own suffering, to no longer live in the grip of past pain. From that encounter with her past, Megan's journey toward forgiveness and healing was about to begin. If you recognized yourself in Megan's words and understand the weight resentment can have on your life, know that, like her, you too can choose to forgive, not to please others, but to free yourself and rebuild your own peace. If you're ready to take this step, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to continue following Megan's story and discover how she transformed her pain into a life lesson. Share this message with anyone you think needs to hear these words. and let's spread the importance of forgiveness in our lives together. Megan was at a crucial point in her emotional journey. The weight of Sarah's betrayal still weighed heavily on her mind, and although she had taken the first step toward forgiveness by reflecting on her mother's words, the real challenge was yet to come. Forgiving someone who had caused such profound pain was not easy. Her mother's words had ignited a flame of hope, but at the same time, an internal conflict burned within her. The question echoing in her mind was, should I really forgive Sarah? The pain Megan felt wasn't something that could be easily erased. It went beyond a loss of trust. It was the feeling of being betrayed by someone she considered her closest friend, someone she believed was part of her own story. How, then, could she simply forgive and move on? Did that mean letting Sarah get away with her actions? Would forgiving her be validating the betrayal and allowing it to happen again to others? These were the questions that tormented Megan. The dilemma she faced was not simple. Revenge, however painful and destructive, seemed a legitimate answer. She felt she deserved justice. Why should she forgive someone who had shown no remorse? The desire to make Sarah feel the same pain she felt was present in her heart, like a flame that refused to be extinguished. Sometimes Megan found herself imagining what it would be like if she could repay the betrayal, how satisfying it would be to see Sarah experience the weight of her own lies and manipulations. However, as these thoughts consumed Megan, she began to realize something very important. Revenge was not the solution. She knew that by seeking revenge, she would only be fueling her anger, prolonging her suffering, and ultimately allowing Sarah to control her emotions. Megan was giving Sarah power over her life, something she no longer wanted to do. She had already lost so much: trust, friendship, and peace of mind. There was no point in continuing to feed herself more suffering. It was then that Megan remembered something important, something her mother had always told her. Revenge never brings true peace. It only fuels the void. The words echoed in her mind, like soft music beginning to dispel the deafening sound of rage. Megan realized that, as tempting as the desire for revenge was, it would not bring the healing she so desperately sought. She was already living in the hell of pain, and seeking revenge would only lead her deeper into that abyss. But the choice to forgive wasn't easy either. Forgiveness wasn't a simple decision to ignore the pain or give Sarah a second chance without consequences. Megan knew that forgiveness was a powerful act, but also very difficult. It was an act of courage, the courage to look pain in the face and decide not to let it define her life. Forgiving meant freeing herself, not because the other person deserved it, but because Megan deserved peace. She deserved to live without the burden of carrying resentment, of clinging to the past. Still, Megan felt an internal resistance. The fear of regretting her decision, the fear of being vulnerable again, was ever present. She worried that by forgiving, she was opening the door to more hurt in the future. How could she trust someone again, after such a profound betrayal? How could she move on, knowing that Sarah might never regret it? But as Megan reflected, she began to realize that forgiveness didn't mean weakness. On the contrary, it was the greatest act of strength she could demonstrate. Forgiveness wasn't about Sarah or forgetting what she did, but about Megan choosing to let go of the pain. It was about Megan choosing freedom, the freedom to move on with her life without being enslaved by anger and resentment. She realized that by forgiving, she was taking back control of her life, her peace, and her happiness. Megan's internal dilemma became a defining moment in her journey. She knew she had to make this choice, and the more she thought about what it meant to forgive, the more she understood that it was the only thing that could truly heal her. Forgiving Sarah didn't mean she agreed with what happened, nor did it mean she was forgetting the pain. Forgiving meant Megan was allowing herself to move on. It was the only way to truly free herself from the emotional prison Sarah's betrayal had created. And although the path of forgiveness was painful and frightening, Megan began to understand that it was also the path of healing. Revenge would only keep her trapped in the past, while forgiveness would open the doors to a future of peace and resilience. The decision wasn't made immediately. Megan didn't suddenly wake up determined to forgive. It was a slow process of reflection and self-discovery. But eventually, she came to a conclusion. Revenge would only perpetuate the pain, while forgiveness could be the key to a new life. The decision was in her hands, and true power lay in choosing to no longer be held hostage by her own suffering. Now, Megan knew her peace was in her hands. Forgiveness was the only way to free herself from a burden she no longer wanted to carry. The difficult choice she faced was between continuing in the darkness or taking the first step into the light. Forgiveness ultimately became the only way to heal her heart and move forward with her life. If you identified with Megan's internal struggle and know how difficult it is to forgive, but also how liberating it is, like this video and subscribe to the channel to continue following her journey of overcoming. Share this video with someone who also needs to hear this message and help us spread the power of forgiveness. Don't let resentment take over your life. Take the first step toward true peace. The process of forgiveness is never easy. For Megan, it was an arduous journey, full of ups and downs, where pain mixed with moments of clarity and, at times, doubt. Despite knowing that forgiveness was the key to her liberation, practicing it proved far more challenging than she imagined. Megan was willing to follow the path of healing, but at the same time, she felt the weight of hurt constantly pulling her back to the past. Resentment, which had for so long been her protective shield, now seemed ingrained in her soul, like a persistent shadow, following her every step. At first, forgiveness seemed like a distant concept, a beautiful idea she knew she should embrace, but one far from becoming a reality. When Megan thought of Sarah, anger still bubbled inside her. It was impossible not to remember the lies, the broken promises, and the feeling of being betrayed by someone she considered a sister. How could she simply let go of this? How could she forget the pain Sarah had caused her? The first major challenge Megan faced was accepting that forgiving didn't mean forgetting. For a long time, she believed forgiveness was only valid if she could completely erase the pain of the betrayal. But she soon realized that was impossible. The pain was real, and the memories couldn't be erased. However, forgiveness didn't require her to forget the pain. It required her to choose to no longer be defined by it. Forgiveness was, above all, a choice to let go of the weight of the past and allow herself to live without the constant reminder of the betrayal. The first step for Megan was to confront her own feelings. She had to stop hiding behind resentment and face her anger head-on. For weeks, she found herself having internal conversations, trying to understand what anger truly represented to her. Anger was her form of protection, a way to avoid feeling vulnerable again, to keep anyone from hurting her. But as she reflected, Megan began to understand that anger wasn't protecting her. It was keeping her trapped, unable to move forward. It was as if she held a key in her hand, but couldn't use it because she was still holding on to the weight of resentment. The second challenge was confronting the idea that forgiveness wasn't something Sarah deserved, but something Megan needed for herself. This was one of the hardest lessons. Of all, Megan found herself thinking, Sarah isn't sorry for what she did. She doesn't deserve my forgiveness. It was difficult to forgive someone who hadn't asked for forgiveness. But Megan soon realized that forgiveness wasn't a prize she was giving Sarah. It was a decision for herself. Forgiveness didn't depend on Sarah's behavior, but on Megan's willingness to let go of the pain and move on with her life. Over time, Megan began to understand that forgiveness didn't mean everything was okay, or that their friendship would ever be the same again. Forgiving Sarah didn't mean accepting what she'd done, nor did it mean minimizing the pain she'd caused. Forgiveness was simply telling herself, I'm not going to live with this pain anymore. I choose peace. This realization was a huge relief for Megan, because for the first time, she understood that forgiveness wasn't something she needed to offer Sarah to make her feel better. Forgiveness was, in fact, a gift Megan was giving herself, a way to reconnect with her own peace and well-being. However, the path to forgiveness was far from linear. With each step Megan took, There were moments when she felt victorious, and others when the resentment rose again, like a ghost from the past. In one of those moments, she received a message from Sarah. Sarah was finally trying to get in touch. Megan felt a wave of conflicting emotions. She thought about the message for hours. What should she do? Respond? Ignore? The resentment seemed to scream inside her, but the decision to forgive had already been made. Even without a direct conversation, Megan knew she no longer needed that communication to move forward. She didn't need an apology to free herself. The decision was within her. And with that in mind, she responded to Sarah with a simple, "I hope you're well." Not because she had completely forgiven in that moment, but because she was beginning to understand that forgiveness wasn't about Sarah. It was about herself. It was a step toward her own healing. Megan also began to give herself permission to feel the complex emotions that forgiveness brought. She realized she couldn't force complete and immediate forgiveness. She had to allow the process to happen gradually, without rushing. There were moments of doubt, anger, and sadness, but there were also moments of relief and freedom. Forgiveness was a process, not an event. It was like cleaning a wound. Rather than trying to heal it all at once, Megan needed to let it heal slowly, one day at a time. Over time, Megan began to feel lighter. Not that the pain had disappeared, but she was no longer held hostage by it. The decision to forgive felt like an act of courage in a moment of weakness. The process of forgiveness wasn't a magical event, but a daily choice to not allow resentment to shape her life. It was something she needed to do every day, every moment the past tried to infiltrate her thoughts. Forgiveness was becoming an emotional muscle she was learning to strengthen. As she reflected on the process of forgiveness, Megan began to feel stronger, more confident, and more open to life. She hadn't erased what had happened, but she was beginning to write a new story, one where pain was no longer the main character. She had taken the first step toward freedom, and now she could move forward with a calmer heart, free from the emotional burden that prevented her from living fully. The decision to forgive was a milestone in Megan's life. It wasn't an instantaneous or easy act, but it was key to her transformation. She knew the process wasn't complete, but she was on the right path, and each day was a victory. If you're going through a process of forgiveness, or have already gone through it, you know how difficult it is, but also how liberating it can be. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this message with anyone you think needs to hear about the power of forgiveness. Don't miss the chance to continue following Megan's journey, where she teaches us that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of the past and creating a better future for yourself. When Megan finally took the courageous step of forgiving Sarah, something deep inside her changed immediately. It wasn't a visible change to everyone around her, but for Megan, the impact was immediate and overwhelming. The feeling of relief was like a huge weight being lifted from her shoulders. Something she'd carried for so long, without even realizing how heavy it was, had finally been released. Forgiveness, which she'd initially feared as an act of weakness, now felt like the greatest act of strength she could have performed. In the first few days after making the decision to forgive, Megan felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months, maybe even years. The whirlwind of emotions that had constantly consumed her began to dissipate, like a storm finally giving way to a clear sky. The nights, which had previously been long and plagued by nightmares of anger and frustration, began to feel calmer. She no longer felt that constant anxiety that had haunted her, as if she were on constant alert. She could breathe more easily, as if she had been freed from an invisible prison that had kept her trapped in her own suffering. At the same time, something more subtle was happening inside Megan. She began to notice shifts in her mindset, a transformation that, while not instantaneous, was beginning to take hold. The resentment and anger, which until recently had been her automatic reactions when she thought of Sarah, began to gradually fade. What had once been a constant pain, a bitter reminder of what she had lost, now became a valuable lesson. a reminder that she had the power to choose how she responded to suffering. Megan began to see life differently. She realized that for too long, she had allowed herself to live in the shadow of her pain, allowing Sarah's betrayal to define who she was and how she saw herself in the world. But now, after forgiveness, she felt stronger, more in control of her life. Forgiveness not only freed her from anger, but also freed her from a victim identity. Megan was no longer the person scarred by betrayal. She was a woman who had overcome her pain and was now ready to live with greater courage and purpose. This liberation was also reflected in her relationships with others. Megan, who had previously withdrawn from everyone for fear of being hurt again, began to open herself up to her friendships and new connections. She felt that by forgiving Sarah, she was not only freeing herself from the past, but also allowing new experiences and relationships into her life. She understood that the key to rebuilding trust in others was not in closing herself off, but in taking the first step to open her heart again, without fear of being vulnerable. Throughout this transformation, Megan also realized that forgiveness wasn't just about the other person. It was primarily about herself. Forgiving Sarah meant freeing herself from the prison she had created within herself. Each time she remembered her suffering and chose not to react with anger or hurt, she was exercising a new inner power. Forgiveness strengthened her, allowing her to see herself differently, no longer as someone scarred by pain, but as someone who had grown from it, learned from it, and was now wiser and stronger. Furthermore, the sense of relief and freedom Megan experienced with forgiveness extended to other areas of her life. Her physical health, which had previously been affected by the constant stress of hurt, began to improve. She felt more energetic and better able to focus on her daily tasks. The stress that had previously dominated her mind was gradually replaced by a sense of calm and clarity. Megan began to realize that by releasing herself emotionally from the pain, she was also allowing her body to heal. Forgiveness also gave her a new perspective on life's challenges. Megan no longer saw obstacles as threats, but as opportunities for growth. She had faced a friend's betrayal firsthand, and through it, she had learned more about her own resilience and strength than she ever imagined. Forgiveness gave her the power to look back and see the situation in a new light, no longer with resentment, but with gratitude for the lesson it taught. Megan now knew that no matter what happened in the future, she had the ability to overcome any pain because she had overcome the deepest of all. This process of personal liberation was, of course, not an endpoint. Megan knew that forgiveness was something she would need to continue practicing, day after day, especially in moments of weakness or when anger tried to return. Forgiveness was not a one-time event, but an ongoing journey. However, she knew the direction was clear, and that she now had the tools necessary to maintain her inner peace, regardless of what was happening around her. Now, with a lighter heart and a calmer mind, Megan was ready to take the next steps in her life. Forgiveness didn't erase what had happened, but it gave her the power to choose how to live from that moment forward. True liberation, she understood, lay in her own ability to let go of the past and move forward with hope and confidence. If you too feel trapped by the pain of the past, know that forgiveness is the key to your freedom. It's not easy, but it is possible, and the relief you feel when you're free from the hurt is indescribable. If Megan's story touched your heart, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this message with anyone you know who needs to hear about the power of forgiveness. Let's work together to spread the idea that true strength lies in being able to forgive and free ourselves from the weight we no longer need to carry. After forgiving Sarah, Megan faced a new challenge, rebuilding her life, now that the weight of her hurt had been lifted. Forgiveness, which had previously seemed a distant and intangible concept, had now become the foundation upon which Megan would begin to rebuild her identity and her future. It was a new phase, but the journey of transformation was just beginning. In the first few days after making the decision to forgive, Megan felt a sense of relief, but also vulnerability. She knew she had taken an important step in her journey, but what would come next was still uncertain. She didn't know exactly what this rebuilding would look like, but she felt deep within herself that she was ready to begin again. Forgiveness had freed her, but now she needed to free herself from the limitations she had imposed on her life for so long. Megan's first step toward rebuilding her life was to begin reconnecting with the things that made her happy, things she had neglected due to pain and suffering. She gave herself permission to rediscover herself. Megan rediscovered her passion for painting, something that had always made her feel alive, but had been pushed aside during the time her mind was occupied with anger. She also began to engage more with her friends and family, unafraid to embrace new relationships. For months, she had closed herself off from the world, believing that the pain of a broken friendship would prevent her from trusting people again. Now, she knew that to rebuild her life, she needed to open herself up to love and friendship again. Furthermore, Megan refocused on her career with greater dedication and enthusiasm. During her grief, her motivation had been clouded by pain, and the opportunities that arose seemed small compared to her anger and resentment. But now, she was seeing the world with a new perspective. Each project she worked on felt more vibrant, more full of possibilities. She no longer saw her work as an obligation or an escape, but as a way to express her skills, her creativity, and her passion for life. Megan began to realize that life was full of opportunities, but to fully embrace them, she needed to let go of the past. The forgiveness she offered Sarah was truly the greatest gift Megan gave herself. By releasing resentment and pain, she opened up space for new possibilities in her life, allowing peace and serenity to fill the spaces previously occupied by hurt. Megan's confidence, which had been shaken by the betrayal, began to slowly rebuild. She realized that by forgiving Sarah, she was not only offering a chance for reconciliation to another person, but also to herself. Forgiveness allowed her to see her own strength, to see how much she was capable of overcoming. Megan found herself more resilient than ever, more capable of facing life's challenges with a perspective of learning, not punishment. She learned that life is not about being a victim of circumstances, but about choosing how to respond to them. Megan's journey wasn't without its challenges. There were times when she felt vulnerable, and anger still resurfaced, when she remembered the betrayal. But she soon realized that rebuilding wasn't a linear process. The path to a fuller, more satisfying life involved ups and downs, and these were part of the healing process. The important thing was that Megan was now in control of her journey, making decisions that brought her closer to her goal of inner peace and happiness. The greatest transformation, however, came from within Megan. She became more compassionate, not only toward others, but also toward herself. Over the months, Megan realized that by forgiving Sarah, she also began to forgive herself. She forgave herself for allowing pain to control her life for so long. She forgave herself for shutting herself off from the world and for distancing herself from the people who loved her. Forgiveness expanded into all areas of her life, creating an energy of healing and self-compassion that helped her make healthier, more balanced decisions. Rebuilding her life also involved reclaiming her dreams and goals. Megan realized that by focusing solely on the betrayal, she had neglected her own desires and dreams. Now she was ready to resume her life projects with renewed energy and determination. She knew the path would not be easy, but she was willing to walk it. The pain of the past no longer dictated her actions, but rather the desire to live fully without the shackles of resentment. Megan also became a source of inspiration to those around her. Her journey of forgiveness and overcoming touched the lives of many. Her friends and family noticed how different she was, lighter, happier, more connected to what truly mattered. She knew her story could help others overcome their own struggles. Megan began sharing her experience with those facing difficult situations, offering a perspective of hope and resilience. She became a living example of how forgiveness can transform lives. At the end of her journey of rebuilding, Megan looked back and saw not a woman broken by pain, but a renewed and stronger woman. Forgiveness was the key to her transformation, and she knew this key would open doors to a future full of opportunities. Megan's life which had previously seemed uncertain and marked by betrayal, was now brimming with possibilities. She was ready to live the life she always wanted, a life where inner peace and happiness don't depend on external circumstances, but rather on the ability to choose emotional freedom. If you also feel the need to free yourself from something that's hindering your growth, know that forgiveness is key. It can be the first step toward truly rebuilding your life. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this message with anyone you think needs to hear it. Let's work together to spread the idea that forgiveness is an act of courage, and that by forgiving, we free ourselves to live the life we deserve. Forgiveness is one of the most powerful acts we can perform in our lives. It's not easy, nor is it immediate. But when we overcome the barriers of pain, anger, and resentment, we encounter a power that transforms not only our emotions, but our entire lives. For Megan, forgiveness was more than just a decision. It was a rebirth. By forgiving Sarah, she was not only freeing the other person, but, most importantly, freeing herself from the invisible chains that bound her to a painful past. Throughout her journey, Megan discovered that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened or justifying others' mistakes. It's not about weakening, but about strengthening. Forgiveness is an act of courage and self-empowerment. When we forgive, we choose not to let yesterday's pain control our today. We choose not to let others' mistakes define who we are or how we will live the rest of our lives. Forgiveness doesn't erase scars, but it gives them new meaning. It doesn't erase pain, but it transforms the way we experience it. By forgiving, we take a step toward emotional freedom, a freedom that allows us to live fully, without the weight of hurt dragging us down. And, most importantly, forgiveness not only frees the forgiver, it also has the power to heal the forgiven. By extending forgiveness, we open the possibility of reconstruction, of redemption, of a new beginning for everyone involved. Megan learned that forgiveness isn't a weakness, as many people think. On the contrary, it's one of the greatest signs of inner strength. It requires self-knowledge, self-control, and above all, self-love. Megan discovered that by forgiving, she was giving herself the most precious gift of all: peace. Not the peace that depends on external circumstances, but the peace that comes from within, from knowing that we are free, that we are no longer at the mercy of other people's actions, but rather in control of our own destiny. Forgiveness is a lesson that goes beyond any pain or injustice. It teaches us to grow, to evolve, and to let go of the past so we can move toward a lighter, happier, more possible future. And by understanding this lesson, Megan found herself stronger than she ever imagined. She gave herself the chance to start over, to rediscover who she was and what truly mattered in her life. Forgiveness wasn't just the end of a cycle of suffering. It was the beginning of a new chapter. If you're struggling with the pain of betrayal, loss, or a mistake someone made, remember, forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about you. By forgiving, you free yourself from the emotional weight that keeps you trapped in the past. You take back control of your life and your happiness. And by doing so, you create a future filled with peace, joy, and new possibilities. The true lesson of forgiveness is simple. It sets us free. It transforms not only the way we see others, but the way we see ourselves and the world around us. Forgiveness is the key that opens the door to a brighter future, one filled with love and understanding. If this message touched your heart, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with anyone you know who needs to hear these words. Together, let's spread the power of forgiveness and show the world the power of releasing the past to create a brighter future. Don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss any chapter of this journey of transformation. Forgive, free yourself, and live the life you deserve.